The story now moves quietly forward. Esther has become queen of Persia. She has been brought into the palace, crowned, and honored before the empire. A great feast was held in her name, celebrating her rise to the throne. And yet, life inside the royal court continues much as before. The Book of Esther introduces the next scene with a curious detail. Scripture says, "When the virgins were gathered together, the second time." The text does not explain this phrase. Some scholars believe it may refer to a regrouping of the young women who had already been brought into the royal household earlier in the chapter. Others believe it refers to a new gathering of women being brought into the king's expanding harem, even after Esther had already become queen. In the Persian court of Xerxes the First, the queen held a unique and honored position. And yet, the king still maintained a large royal household filled with attendants and concubines. Ancient writers, such as the Greek historian Herodotus, describe the Persian court as a place of immense wealth and elaborate royal customs. So even though Esther is now queen, the structure of the palace continues to operate in the same way. The empire moves forward with its ceremonies, its officials, and its daily rhythms. And quietly, the story shifts our attention away from the palace chambers to a man sitting at the gate, Mordecai. The text simply tells us, Mordecai sat in the king's gate. To modern readers, unfamiliar with gated cities and royal complexes, this might sound like someone sitting near an entrance. But in the ancient world, the gate of a city or palace was much more than a doorway. It was a place where officials gathered, where legal matters were heard, and where royal announcements passed through, a center of administration and government activity. To sit at the gate suggests that Mordecai held some form of recognized position connected to the royal court. And yet, as we saw in episode 3, the story has already quietly shown that he was not newly arrived. Before Esther was ever brought into the palace, Mordecai was already near, moving within its outer courts, present and in place. The timing of these events can be placed within a small window in the story. Esther became queen in the 7th year of the reign of Xerxes the First, around 479 BC. Later in the book, major events take place in the 12th year of the king, around 474 BC. The moments described here in Esther chapter 2, verses 19 through 23, fall somewhere within that span. The exact date is not given, but the story quietly shows us this. Mordecai is in place before the crisis begins to unfold. At this point, the story reminds us of an important detail. Esther had not yet revealed her background. Scripture says, Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her. Though she now wears the royal crown, the king does not know that Esther belongs to the Jewish people living throughout the Persian Empire. Generations earlier, many Jews had been carried into exile when Babylon conquered Jerusalem. Later, when the Persian Empire rose to power under Cyrus the Great, those who wished were permitted to return to their homeland, around 538 BC, along with other displaced peoples. But many remained, scattered across the empire. Esther's family line was among them, and for now her identity remains hidden. One day, while Mordecai sits at the king's gate, he overhears something alarming. 2 of the king's chamberlains have become angry. Their names are Bigthan and Teresh. The text describes them as men who kept the door, officials responsible for guarding access to the king's private chambers. Because they stood so close to the king, their positions carried great responsibility and great trust. But now these men are plotting something terrible. They intend to assassinate the king. Court politics in the ancient world could be dangerous and unpredictable. Personal rivalries, ambition, or resentment could easily lead to deadly conspiracies. But whatever their motive, the danger is real. Mordecai immediately reports what he has heard. He sends the message to Queen Esther. Esther then brings the warning to the king. At this point in the story, in Esther chapter 2, verse 22, she appears able to communicate with the king without difficulty. Later in the book, in Esther chapter 4, verse 11, we learn that approaching the king without being summoned could be dangerous. Anyone who entered the inner court uninvited risked death. Yet here, the text gives no sign of such danger. It is likely that the king had already called for Esther, or that she was able to report the matter through the normal channels of the palace. Either way, Esther faithfully delivers the message, and she makes it known that the information came from Mordecai. This detail matters. By naming him as the source, Esther ensures that his loyalty will be recorded. The king orders an investigation. The accusation proves true. The conspiracy is uncovered. Bigthan and Teresh are executed for their attempt to assassinate the king, and the king's life has been saved. After the plot is uncovered, the story records one more detail. It was written in the Book of the Chronicles before the king. Persian kings maintained official records of important events within the empire. These chronicles preserved accounts of loyalty, political actions, and significant moments within the royal court. The detail is given almost as a record itself, direct and without comment, reflecting the broader tone of Esther, which often reads like a court chronicle. Mordecai's discovery of the assassination plot is written into those records, and then the story moves on. No reward is given, no public honor is announced. Mordecai receives no promotion. The text does not tell us why. It does not even suggest that Esther spoke of it to the king. But the record remained, quietly preserved, waiting to be read at the right time. At this moment, nothing appears remarkable. A brief conversation, overheard at the palace gate, leads to a warning for the king. A conspiracy is uncovered. The danger passes, and the event is quietly written into the royal chronicles. Then life in the empire continues as usual, but the author of the Book of Esther is quietly preparing the reader for something more. Years later, during a sleepless night in the palace, the king will ask that the royal chronicles be read aloud, and among those records, one entry will stand out, the record of a man who once saved the king's life, a man named Mordecai. One of the striking features of the Book of Esther is that the name of God never appears in its pages, and yet the story reveals a deeper pattern. History often turns through moments that seem small and easily overlooked. A young woman unexpectedly becomes queen. A man finds himself sitting at the palace gate. A record, once written, waits quietly in the royal archives. Nothing appears miraculous, and yet these ordinary moments begin to shape the future of an entire people. The empire believes it holds the course of events, but quietly, patiently, another hand is at work, and the moment written in the king's chronicles will one day change everything. As we close, listen to the words of scripture from which this episode was taken. The Book of Esther, chapter 2, verses 19 through 23. King James Version. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth, and sought to lay hands on the king Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the Book of the Chronicles before the king.